morning. It's April 26, 2024, and I'm calling the meeting to order at 9 a.m. First item is the roll call. Please say aye. Dr. Patrick Pizzini.
Aye.
Dr. Michael Coble.
Aye.
Mr. Mark Daniel.
Present.
Dr. Nancy Downing.
Aye.
Dr. Jasmine Drake.
Aye.
Dr. Sarah Kerrigan.
Aye.
Mr. Jarvis Parsons.
Aye.
And Ms. Erica Zeman.
Aye.
All right, so we don't have anyone to recuse. Second item is the review and adoption of the minutes from the January 26, 2024 Commission quarterly meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Dr. Byrne, I make a motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. The next item is the administrative update.
Before we go to that, Dr. Bernard, we need to approve some amended minutes from the April 14th meeting because one of the people in this room who was looking through our minutes noticed that we had an error in the date and brought it to our attention. So we want to fix that. If you could request a motion to fix that.
Is there a motion to amend the April 14th, 2023 minutes?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, now, item number 3 is the office administrative update.
So. Can you hear me? Is this working? Okay, great. So on the administrative update, we have our third quarter budget status report there. We're happy to take any questions about the budget that you may have. We're pretty much on track. The budget is tight this year of the biennium because of the way the licensing fees fall, but we're on track to finish the fiscal year without having any extra money on hand, that's for certain. So if you have any questions about that, I'm happy to answer those.
We don't have to go for any additional financing from the budget section.
No, I think we have their, what's in front of you has already been approved, so I think we're good. On the update on the status of launch of the database functions, we did ask OCA to come and talk to us about where they stand on launching that. So Brett, do you want to come up? You can come right over to the microphone here and the commissioners, we would love to hear about it.
Good morning. So I'm Brett Watkins. I'm the IT Enterprise Architect for the Office of Support Administration, and this is the FSE portal and public are one of the projects that I'm overseeing. So I want to give you, I was asked to kind of give an update on where we're at. So we've previously launched the labs, the licensee, and the OSAC standards piece. The 3 items remaining are self-disclosure, complaint, and quality incident. We have now released self-disclosure and complaint to the Forensic Science Commission themselves, and we have converted all the old records, the base records for them to update. It is ready to go live for the labs as well. It's just when FSC wants the training done for them to release that. The public piece is currently being worked on. It is due this spring, which ends next Friday. So the only piece remaining was to add a CAPTCHA to it. We've added that, we're now testing it. So we anticipate being able to release the public site for complaint and self-disclosure as soon as that's done, as soon as FSC gives us the approval to do that. As far as quality incident, this is the only one that's really kind of outstanding. Quality incident was done. We met with the Houston Forensic Science Center, and they actually had a more robust system than we had, so we went back to the drawing board to find a PDF reader that will index PDFs and be able to read that. We have found one. There's a significant cost per month to it, but we were just given approval by our director yesterday to go forward with that. So next week we will begin going back to quality incident, and we should have that wrapped up within 4 weeks.
So I think the goal, Brett, is that it'll all be launched by June
June 30th.
30th.
Yes, correct.
Megan Boyd, who's the administrative director for OCA, has made that her goal as well. Unless they have other projects that they need to move on to. So I think the labs will be able to start using it soon. One of the things that we have to do on our end is to populate all the existing data into what they've built. But Lee, did you want to add anything? Because you've been testing the system.
I think the exciting part for our stakeholders, and particularly the quality managers of the lab, is that you'll be able to submit all of your disclosures online, including the proficiency testing, non-consensus reports in kind of a consolidated form that asks the questions that we want you to answer, and they'll go straight to our inbox that way. So rather than getting an email with all of your attachments. So I think it'll be a more efficient way for us to manage self-disclosures in particular, but also complaints once we get those pieces up.
The other thing that Brett and company built into it is a way for, if you're a quality manager and you start a disclosure, you can keep working on it over time. In other words, you don't have to like put it all in one fell swoop. I see some nods in the audience, because sometimes you might start on it and then be like, oh, I need to go grab this other thing, or they're asking this question, let me pause. So you can do that, right? You can pause, you can save your work, and then maybe you can come back to it a couple days later, you can go and pick up where you left off. And then at the end, when you finally hit like ready, it's going, then it comes into our work queue. And we have a queue where we're like, then we look at it, and then we decide where it goes from there in the tree. So it's quite a sophisticated and robust system that we're excited for y'all to start using soon.
Questions?
Any questions?
Thank y'all.
Thank you.
All right.
I don't have anything else, Lee, do you?
All right, item number 4, Mr. Daniel.
Yes, Dr. Bernard, our first self-disclosure is a holdover from our January 24 meeting. It comes out, it's number 23.40. It comes out of the Houston Forensic Science Center. And as we had briefly discussed back in January, they became aware of rare instances in their forensic biology DNA section where there was an inherent subtlety present in StarMix that created a probabilistic genotyping where the likelihood of ratio scenario related to an evidence item for several reported cases needed a supplemental report. As they analyzed this, they found it to be in rare instance the lower bound higher posterior density and the lower point estimate values calculated in the StarMix supported largely different propositions. They did a retroactive audit since they had implemented the software in 2019. They found 3 cases containing the wide interval. They reviewed the manufacturer's guidance in this topic, and they had adopted one of the recommendations to report the subsource and the HPDLR values. They included a notification memo to accompany each reissued report and also notified the respective counsel in each of the cases correlating those reports. As an additional corrective action, they let the commission be made aware of 3 additional cases and supplemental reports. Staff had reviewed the matter carefully. One of the issues is the commission will be conducting a statewide StarMix user meeting at which this issue will be raised. But in light of the root cause analysis and corrective action, staff has brought forth a recommendation of taking no further action. If there are any questions, comments, or discussion, I would make that in the form of a motion.
Just one quick comment. Dr. Cole and I was actually talking with Don Boswell yesterday at some length. We have a list about at least a mile long, maybe two, of things that we need to work on training wise for DNA.
That's fair.
So I think, Dr. Cole and my hope is that we'll be able to return to fleshing something out on how to plan this week.
The other one you nominated.
So I think we'll be in good shape. And the rare allele issue will be on the list of things that we tackle among other issues. Thank you.
And there's another note, it might be appropriate that Commissioner Zima abstain from discussion on this agenda item.
All right,
I would make that in the form of a motion, take no further action.
is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Which brings us to our next disclosure, it's item 23.65, it comes out of Signature Science, their forensic biology unit. Back in September, an analyst had reopened an item of evidence in the case to address some technical concerns. Upon reopening, they recognized there were 3 possible semen stains on the item that had been AP tested during the original examination, had not been AP tested, I'm sorry. The stains had been noted during examination, but simply not tested. They notified the technical leader and their team. The lab suspended the analyst from conducting biological screening. Prior to the suspension, they approved the analyst to conduct unsupervised casework for semen screening only. Initially, they re-examined 6 other cases during the investigation by the analyst not being involved in those cases. The reviewing analyst evaluated some documentation of visible and ALS positive stains in addition to the number of stains tested for possible semen. They found discrepancies in 2 of those cases. They broadened the scope of their investigation, included 4 additional cases for review, and found 4 more discrepancies. So you had a total of 11 cases to be reviewed. And the laboratory notified the submitting agency with regard to each of those investigations. As part of the root cause analysis, identified 2 potential sources. One was the analyst was having some difficult personal issues at that time. Secondly, there was a series of computer issues occurring on the day of the examination in one of the cases that caused difficulty in the exam, recording the exam notes. Another 3rd possible root cause was the analyst's documentation on items within the notes were not very easy to track and follow. Correctively, the lab has set about to remove the analyst from serological screening, pending re-examination of cases. They caution remind the staff exam notes should be captured concurrently with the evidence examination. They also have cases that have been reported to the submitting agency where semen screening was performed, and this analyst will be re-examined each and every one. And the lab also created a serology template for staff to use in examination for items searching for the presence of biological fluids. I don't know what more they could have done. Staff had again reviewed this matter carefully and had brought forward a recommendation of taking no further action out of the root cause analysis and corrective action. Any questions, comments, or concerns? If not, I will make that in the form of a motion to take no further action.
All right, the motion's made. Is there a second?
Second.
Second's made. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Which brings us to our 3rd item. It comes out of Sorensen Forensics, item 23.66. Back in October, the lab discovered a previous employee had performed unauthorized casework for a process they did not receive appropriate authorization from the DNA technical leader. They determined the biologist was actually the son of a former CEO of Sorensen. He had directed his son, who was the forensic biologist, to perform extractions, amplification, data analysis, interpretation on one case using the Fusion 6C star kit without the DNA technical leader's approval. It was kind of evening recreational work, is what it sounded like. The lab investigated and reviewed all the cases in response to this incident where authorization from the lab. DNA technical leaders did not give authorization prior to the work. They found 16 affected cases. Laboratory submitted 1 case, a homicide case, and 1 is a human remains identification matter. identified the incident as a somewhat of a conflict of interest, which I would concur they got that right. Being the parent had a vested interest in assigning casework to his son, a forensic biologist, may have disregarded policy for authorization. They seem to me they did what they could. They've updated their policies to define the responsibility of the employee more clearly. Regarding competency and training, they also provided new case summary sheets for priority cases. Both employees no longer work for the lab, which sounds correct to me. They now have analysts review and sign a form indicating the analyst will notify the lab any potential conflict of interest regarding any case, which is good. So it appears the problem has been removed from the lab. Staff have reviewed this carefully and brought forth a recommendation to take no further action, which I concur with. Any questions or comments about that? If not, I will make that formal motion to take no further action.
All right, motion for no further action. Is there a second?
Second.
Second's made. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Which brings us to our fourth item, is item 24.03. It comes out of the Houston Forensic Science Center. It's the Crime Scene Investigation Unit. They had a crime scene unit trainee who was working with the field training officer. The field training officer ascertained that there appeared to be a page missing from the actual notes that the trainee had used on the scene. They later realized those notes had been shredded. The trainee is no longer employed with HFSC. The CSI assistant agreed the information contained in the notes was sufficient, but not an exact replication of what had been shredded. The lab removed the paper shredders from the administrative floors and replaced them in shredded bins to prevent immediate destruction of documents. They also undertook a second corrective action. They realized it affected one case. The CSI trainee had performed work as a crime scene unit training program on only 25 cases, and they now seek to differentiate between the case only being destroyed and the personnel-related events that occurred in response to destruction of this one page. In response to what occurred, the lab provided a list of case numbers. The CSI trainee worked to the Harris County DA's office, as well as the Harris County Public Defender's office, along with details of what they've done. And the trainee is no longer employed with HFSC. And it looks like they did everything they could possibly do. And in light of that, staff made a recommendation that we take no further action, which I concur with. Are there any questions or comments or concerns? If not, I will make that in the form of a motion to take no further action.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second's made. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Dr. Bernard, I might need to recuse myself, and I just wanted that to be noted.
Okay, I should have said that.
That's okay.
My bad.
Thank you.
And that brings us to our next item, is item 24.04. It comes out of DPS Houston, Forensic Biology Unit. They had reported an incident in that section where there was a sample switch of casework. The numbers are very similar. The first case ends in 11612. The second case ends in 11652. The laboratory determined that during batch review, the profile comparison of two matched multiple samples in these cases at a high percentage. And when manually compared the profiles, they were very similar. Back in December, the CODIS administrator notified the technical leader that there was some contamination concern due to two profiles from two different cases being matched by CODIS, but did not match the actual facts in the case scenario. Baker Fairgrounds, the two entered profiles appeared to be almost identical. It became apparent that there had been some switch between 11652 and 11612. As far as root cause analysis, it appeared that the DNA section had increased their batch sizes just prior to that and implemented a new sexual assault kit workflow that required every sample from the kit to be forwarded for DNA analysis. That resulted in larger batches of samples that are manually set up for quantification and amplification. Working with larger batches has an effect downstream of use the GMapper comparison tool. It's just too much being put into the pipeline. As far as case review, they assign the analyst to administer review of casework while reviewing the sampling from their previous work. The lab reviewed all the casework applications previously performed by the analyst and found no concerns. The analysts amended their process so they no longer open the sample tubes all at once for a particular row. And they also are currently validating coagility, which should minimize the need for some manual setup. And it appears to be a genuine mistake. It looks like they've set forth to correct it, and they did a careful analysis. In light of that, our staff had reviewed the matter and brought forth a recommendation taking no further action, which I concur with. And any questions or comments or concerns about this matter? If not, I will make that in the form of a motion that we take no further action.
All right, is there a second? Second's made. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Which brings us to our next item. I think Mr. Zemek and also Dr. Cole want to recuse themselves on this as it comes out of the University of North Texas Health Science Center of Human Identification, their biology and DNA unit. Their forensic biology section, they were cutting sexual assault kit swabs for DNA extraction, and the swab cuttings from two different cases were accidentally placed in the same tube. And then when the swab cuttings were removed, they were also, for some reason, unintentionally discarded. The biologist did not compare the item number on the open swab box against the item number on the tube of the swab cuttings as they're being transferred. They set about to analyze this. They found several factors contributing to it. One was distraction due to observation by a trainee in the room while the process was being undertaken. Also, formatting of the batch list, which didn't provide easy delineation separating the two cases, and also variable practices by the analysts for tube labeling and tube separation. They undertook corrective actions. One is they bold lines separating each case on the forensic batch unit batch list, or they distinguish the cases more easily. They also instructed staff to cross off samples on the list as they are cut to help visualize and prevent, what is cross-contamination. And the biologist involved also implemented a system for labeling tubes and separating tubes containing samples. The technical leader now ensures all staff have an effective system for verifying sample numbers and differentiating between various tubes as the work is being done. And then when trainees are in the room watching, absorbing, learning, everybody's supposed to keep their mouth shut in the future, which is not bad. And what more can be done, I'm not sure. It looks like they were very thorough in correcting this and analyzing it. And staff had brought forth a recommendation that we take no further action, which I would concur with. Any comments or concerns, and other from Dr. Cole and Ms. Zemek? If not, I will make that in the form of motion. We take no further action.
All right, motion for no further action. Is there a second?
Second.
Second is made. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries.
Brings our next matter, which comes out of DPS Abilene, their seized drugs unit. They had an evidence technician set about to do some testing and could not locate a glass meth pipe. The laboratory information management system chain of custody report showed the last place should have been in the vault. The lab searched and searched a number of locations in the shared bench space between the shelves, even I think the entire lab. It could not be located. The lab really couldn't ascertain any definitive root cause. They notified the Weatherford PD and also the Park County District Attorney's Office. The cases were actually dismissed. They're now thinking that perhaps there was some inadvertent disposal into a trash can, so they've moved the trash cans further away from the work area. Dr. Martin, I don't know if they moved it 18 inches or 24 inches. I don't know. Okay, but it's been moved.
That's fresh.
Yeah, that's good. And then they perform transfers in the management system prior to returning cases to the vault. And It appears to be an honest mistake. I don't know what else could have been done, but we appreciate them reporting it, and staff had reviewed this and recommendation of taking no further action, which I concur with, but we certainly entertain any questions or comments. If not, I will make that the form of motion. We take no further action.
All right, motion has been made. Is there a second?
Second.
Second's been made. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Which brings us to item 24.10 from the UNT Health Science Center Center for Identification. I think Dr. Cole and Ms. Zemer are going to recuse themselves from this. Is that correct? Okay. And back in October, in the forensic biology section, the analysts began processing a sexual assault kit, thinking that it should contain a buccal swab, and it did not. And so they searched extensively and did not locate the buccal swab. The lab conducted a root cause investigation. While they were doing it, they found another item missing, which turned out to be a pair of panties as an item of evidence. The analyst involved in this no longer was assigned to the forensic unit, and so they looked at their evidence locker. It was not there. They never did locate the item of panties. They've taken several remedial actions. They've searched all the forensic unit storage locations. They've expanded inventory of all evidence storage locations as well as evidence vault. I think this is the one they even looked down the elevator shaft. Frankly, they really couldn't ascertain the root cause for the two items of missing evidence. They did identify some opportunities where they could possibly improve, which is always good. They're going to revise and expand their transfer of evidence policy and procedure to provide more specific instructions and to promote some sort of consistent policy in that regard, and also provide some training on these new changes. And evidence specialists will continue to monitor inventory of evidence vault to maintain location of all items. It looks like two items were lost. That happens. Don't know what else the lab could have done, but in light of that, staff had reviewed this carefully and brought forth to us a recommendation of no further action in light of the analysis and also the corrective actions. And I concur with that, but would ask for any comments or thoughts or concerns. If not, I'll make that form of motion, take no further action.
Motion has been made. Is there a second?
Second.
Second's been made. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Which brings us to our next actual complaint, which is item 24.01. We don't need to do extensive discussion on this, Ms. Garcia. I don't think you indicated yesterday there's more information coming. Might be best we just go ahead and table that.
The laboratory gave us a lot of information that needs still to be reviewed by Dr. Cole and the CMAC, but we certainly will have something for next time.
In light of that, I would make a motion to table.
All right, motion's been made to table. Is there a second?
Second.
Second's been made. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
And our last complaint for this quarter is item 24.06. It comes from Kenneth Hunt. He had made an allegation that he had been in the FBI National DNA Index System since way back in 2002. And that provided some sort of proof that a supplemental report done in 2008 was fabricated and forged by an employee of the Regional Crime Lab, acting in concert with an officer of the court and law enforcement. He alleged that some buccal swab did not even exist. The offense actually involved an aggravated robbery matter from a check cashing business in Houston area. The defendant made an alibi that he was in state jail at the time. That was not accurate. There had been a federal writ proceeding, and the defendant actually stipulated the DNA findings at trial in exchange for a procedural matter where they would not go into his prior convictions. DPS produced records in response to this complaint, and it appeared that the laboratory had screened the evidence and obtained a partial profile from Mesquite Cap. They entered the results routinely into CODIS, received a hit. So his claim that no reference sample didn't exist is not consistent with the record. And so much of what he brought forward was refuted. Staff had made a recommendation to dismiss the complaint as being completely unsupported by the record and the prior appellate opinions. And there's no evidence of professional negligence or misconduct related to the analysis. I concur with the recommendation. I would respectfully make that in the form of a motion unless there are any comments or concerns. If not, I will make a motion to dismiss.
All right, motion's been made to dismiss. Is there a second? Second's been made. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
And Dr. Bernard, just as a housekeeping matter, we had several years back authorized staff to administratively dismiss complaints that simply didn't rise to the level of giving us jurisdiction. There were 3 that came forth, received as of April 5th. It was 24.07, 24.8, 24.09. Each of those were outside of the commission's jurisdiction, and as 2407 didn't constitute forensic analysis. 2408, there were some findings of the Court of Criminal Appeals. We had no jurisdiction over some autopsy procedure conducted by a medical examiner. And then 2409 was asking us to intervene in post-conviction matters. So I would ask that we, by vote, give blessing and approval to the administrative staff dismissals of those 3 complaints, 2407, 24.08, 24.09. I'll make that in form of motion.
All right, motions are made. Is there a second? Second's been made. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries.
Dr. Bernard, I believe that concludes our complaints disclosures section.
Thank you, Mr. Daniels. Agenda item number 5 is a discussion of the status of crime laboratory accreditation program.
In your accreditation summary this quarter, we have 10 accreditation-related events that were reported this quarter. One of those was a reduction in scope of services by an accredited lab, and one was an addition of services by an accredited lab. And there were 7 successful surveillance document reviews this quarter. And then we had one reported accreditation forensic biology DNA issue from a lab involving mitochondrial DNA testing issue. Do you have any questions about the reported incidents? The second item B here is your proficiency testing non-consensus reported memorandum. The commission's considering 15 incidents of reported non-consensus or non-expected results during proficiency testing or performance monitoring activities. 3 of those were reported simply due to the method not used in the lab's casework. 4 because the answer to the test was just outside the lab's validated reporting limits. 1 was a test provider or manufacturing error. 1 was a clerical entry or data mistake by the test taker. And 4 were proficiency tests that may require some level of root cause analysis or impact the test taker's proficiency, his or herself. And we also had 2 DNA mixture interpretation issues that were reviewed by Commissioners Coble and CMAC. And the laboratory's response and explanations were found to be satisfactory in those incidents. If anyone wants further explanation about anything described in the memorandum, happy to answer any questions. Item C here is a rule exemption, and it's a rule proposal that clarifies the scope of an already existing accreditation exemption for certain testing that's performed in the case of supervision services to really express more clearly that pretrial bond hearing and pretrial services are covered by the language there. So we've added language that clarifies that those activities are covered as well.
All right, so is there a motion to adopt the amendments to section 651.7, subject to suggested non-substantive revisions from the Office of the Governor, Texas Register, and Commission staff?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Okay, for item D here, A2LA, which is one of the accrediting bodies that we recognize, one of two, ANAB and A2LA. They have formalized the Forensic Science Commission's requirements that extended from the Cologne report into formal assessment criteria and checklist documents, and you have these documents in your meeting materials. But what the requirements say essentially is that the labs must review investigative reports by the commission. They have to communicate expectations for testimony preparation. They have to have a process for when an employee leaves or returns to testify. And they also have to have a policy that builds in flexibility for current employees that are going back to testify for a previous employer.
We had already worked with ANAB on a similar, they integrated into their mnemonic, I think is what they call it. So it's been great to work with A2LA on that as well, and Brittany Rollison has been the leader on that from A2LA's side.
The next item here, not the final yet, is a disclosure expectations memorandum that we distributed to all of our accredited forensic science service providers. And what the memorandum essentially says is that if a laboratory or agency learns of facts for potential disclosure, but they haven't necessarily had time to fully ascertain the issue scope or much less get into the root cause analysis, but they're concerned about complying with timing requirements, we ask that the laboratory either call one of our attorneys or email one of our attorneys so that we avoid any issues where the commission doesn't know of a substantive fact or facts or circumstance in the lab does have possession of that information.
So if y'all remember last year, I think it was about February or March, ANAB came out and said that they wanted disclosure to happen from labs either within 30 days of an incident, or if you found out that an incident had occurred that was sort of historical in nature, in other words, enough time had passed between the incident and it coming to your awareness, that needed to be disclosed immediately. So immediately is a little hard word, right, for folks to comply with, I think. And so what we tried to do, and what it is immediately is not hard for disclosure to ANAB in a sense, because you know if you log something across to ANAB, like some sort of communication that describes what's going on, it's gonna be a while until they get to it typically, right? So you have some time to supplement that. But when you provide the same disclosure to the commission, our meeting may be 4 weeks from now, and you are sort of stuck trying to figure out, like, how am I gonna get my hands around this issue in a way that provides accurate and complete disclosure to the commission, because you don't wanna come in here and tell us a bunch of stuff that later on you realize is wrong, or, you know, or incomplete, or that you had a misunderstanding of something that was going on. So there's sort of a practice that certain labs in the state have gotten into over the years, which is that I just get a phone call, or Lee does, or Robert does, as the thing is happening, essentially, pretty much. That just says like, hey, we just want to give the commission a heads up that we found this thing. We're not sure exactly what it entails, but we want to make you aware, and we'll get back to you as soon as we have further detail. So we found that that works quite well, and it can be done either in the form of an email, brief email, or in the form of a phone call. And then what we suggest is if it's going to be a phone call, you should follow up with an email to us that just says, you know, we just talked and we'll let you know when we have more information. But the reason why we think that's important to lay out in an actual written document is so that you all feel like, okay, well, I can still satisfy the immediacy requirement, and with the commission at least, I have a little bit more time to gather information and to neither over nor underreact in terms of your presentation of whatever the issue might be. So that's what we're trying to get at with this memo. We hope that it's provided some clarity to folks. So if anyone has questions, you're welcome to. And I do want to express gratitude to the TAP plan for looking at it before we released it, and all DPS looked at it, a bunch of you all looked at it. So I feel like it, and provided very helpful edits, including Commissioner Zemak, who has a lot of experience in this area. So we feel pretty good about the memo. We can also add detail later on if y'all feel like, we'd really like more information about X, Y, or Z. In this memo, we also lay out, to give you a little bit of information about how we do things at the commission, what it is that staff does in preparation for these meetings. We have 3 different memoranda that we prepare to outline what we see as the issues that require further follow-up. We have, of course, the PT memo that Lee just talked about, the proficiency monitoring memo, where we talk about what we're seeing in terms of non-consensus results. We have our the memo that Mr. Daniel uses to help guide his presentation of complaints and disclosures. And we have the accreditation memo that summarizes, surveillance activities or on-site assessment activities. So that's what we do to prepare commissioners, and we thought it would be helpful for quality managers to understand that a little better so that you know about our timing. 3 weeks before the meeting, we try to say, like, if you want to get something to us, you need to get in by now, because we have to prepare the stuff and get it to everyone and make sure that they have a chance to review it, because they also have, more than full-time day jobs and caseloads and trials and things. So that's why we created that memo, is to try to help improve our understanding of how we do things, and to try to help you all know that we're here and you could do these initial disclosures, and then give yourself a little bit more time to gather additional information. So thank you to everyone for contributing to that.
I think we're gonna move on to agenda item, sub-item F here, and Robert Smith's going to give an update.
Yeah, this is an update from a disclosure we received from the city of Boston.
Sorry, it's
Forensic Science Department, they had a disclosure about a firearms analyst who claimed they weren't being properly trained and their records may have been doctored or altered. So we recommended an independent audit, and they've come back with a plan, which is in your meeting materials. They're retaining a qualified subject matter expert who's going to do a technical review of the training records of the 3 analysts that currently work, 2 analysts that currently work there and 1 that departed after this occurred, and also reviewing the casework of those 3 analysts. They're going to review all the casework of the analysts who made this outcry, and a random sample of another analyst that's been working there for a while, and then a review for somebody who just started there and hasn't been trained for it. And they're going to give, this subject matter expert is going to provide final summary reports of both the training record review, the training program, and the case review. They'll probably notify us of any discrepancies that are discovered during that audit, and they'll communicate the outcomes to the accrediting body once that's finished.
All right, so do we have a motion to approve the City of Austin Forensic Science Department's plan for enlisting an independent consultant for technical review of firearms, tool marks, training records, and casework?
I'll make that motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. All right. Anything else, Lee?
Nothing else on that.
All right, next is item number 6, which is an update on licensing advisory committee.
So the licensing advisory committee met yesterday in this building. Just to give you a quick update on the status of our licensing program, we currently have 1,304 total current licensees. And since the program's inception, we've licensed over 1,500 analysts and technicians. At the meeting yesterday, the licensing committee approved 2 rule proposals that we'll review in C and D here below. And they tasked staff with one particular thing on voluntary licensure with respect to crime scene disciplines. They directed staff to come up with an outline that establishes base guidelines for intra and interagency proficiency monitoring programs for laboratories. And staff plans to work with key committee members in doing that and bringing it to you all next meeting.
I think, one of the things that's been interesting about expanding the voluntary license program is that we realize that certain disciplines have better offerings for external proficiency testing available than others. So for example, if you think about crime scene, number one, it's hard to do an external PT crime scene, but number two, what's currently offered, I think the choices are quite limited. So there's interest, I think, and in fact, the same thing was expressed by the forensic anthropologists who attended the meeting, that there is some interest in trying to figure out how one could do, high quality interagency proficiency monitoring. It's not a small undertaking, but I think they'd like to see some guidance from the commission on how, if they were to go about doing that, what we would expect. So that's something that we're going to start talking about, and I think there's a general seem-like consensus among the LAC members that a well-designed interagency proficiency monitoring program could be more rigorous and in some cases sufficiently so than what CTS offers, just depending on the discipline. So I think that'll be an interesting conversation for sure. And we should have something to report next time.
Okay, and see here, we're asking the commission to adopt a rulemaking proposal on voluntary licensure that essentially modifies the requirements for document examiners by increasing the education requirement to a BA or higher. And it also better defines the activities covered by document examination by giving a definition of that. And then finally, you all have seen these rules from our last meeting, and we've modified them as directed from our last meeting and into this new proposal to establish voluntary licenses for crime scene and latent print processing disciplines.
All right, so is there a motion to withdraw the January 26th, 2024 action to adopt amendments to sections 651.202 and 651.222 and propose amended rules to section 651.202 and 651.222, subject to non-substantive revisions from the Office of the Governor, Texas Register, and Commission staff.
I'll make that informal motion, Dr. Murray.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
D here is a rule proposal to change the licensed birth month expiration policy to only apply to current licensees who were initially licensed before January 1, 2024 and are renewing on or before December 31, 2026. And that's because as we were administering the policy, we realized that initial licensees, like folks that are applying anytime throughout the year, the need or the dilemma that was presented by us renewing everybody at the same time every 2 years in an even number year just isn't present for those who just are randomly applying for a license. And so we're making this provision only apply to those that we're trying to scatter out their expiration dates. And anybody who applies that an initial application who's never been licensed before, they don't have to comply with these prorated fees, and Rodney doesn't have to calculate the prorated fees or calculate the continuing ed that's required. And then once we get through this batch of folks that are gonna be scheduled a new expiration date, we can move on and present you all with another rulemaking that just does away with the birth month expiration policy altogether.
All
Does that
right.
make sense?
Is someone willing to make a motion to propose rule amendments to 651.207 and 651.208, subject to non-subject substantive revisions from the Office of the Governor, Texas Register, and Commission staff.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
On E here, we also talked about different options yesterday for statistics for law enforcement personnel that likely are going to be applying for crime scene or late processing licenses and have to fulfill that stats requirement. And Shelley Rossi graciously donated her time and volunteered to collaborate with Lone Star College. And so they're working on developing a course dedicated to law enforcement. And the professor is actually a TCOL certified peace officer, a retired peace officer, and teaches stats just by chance. So we're working on that. We don't have to vote on anything today until we have like an actual syllabus or something like that. So we hope to have that by July.
I think that you have a question, comment.
You can, would you mind getting to the microphone just so we can pick up your audio?
I just wanted to let the commission know that I have a scheduled meeting next week with Dean Garer, Dr. Jermaine Johnson, and the professor that teaches statistics. I'm gonna get the curriculum that has already been evaluated by the commission to share with Lone Star College University Park so that they can create a syllabus for your review.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley. Shelley worked hard on this, and I think it's gonna be really good for law enforcement. Because we'll have statistics now, which everyone loves.
All right, brings us to item number 7.
I think we had, did you wanna go over F on the agenda or agenda item 6?
Sure.
Yeah.
So, if you recall, for the voluntary license categories, we always include certain quality standards that were the employing entity to be accredited, they would have in place, but since the voluntary licenses don't have to be from accredited FSSPs, may or may not exist in the agency, and so the one that we are working on right now is actually forensic anthropology, and they will have one for us next time. They're all apparently on track to become accredited, but they do have some thoughts on what that chart will look like, and they're working on it, so we'll have it for you in July.
Agenda item 7 is a repeal and re-proposal of our notice and hearing rule, and it's just simply to renumber the rule as a matter of course because it was incorrectly numbered in the Texas Register. So we'll first repeal and recompose.
All right, is there a motion to repeal section 651.402 and propose new rule 651.401 subject to suggested non-substantive revisions from the Office of the Governor, Texas Register, and Commission staff?
So moved, Dr. Bernard.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, item number 8.
Agenda item 8 is the rule adoption to the companion proposal 4-year rule review you guys reviewed last time. We're simply adopting our review of our administrative rules here, and just to remind you all, the rule review is designed just to ensure that the legal reasons and policy reasons for adopting or re-adopting the rules just continue to exist.
And this is statutorily required for all agencies that have rulemaking authority.
Is there a motion to adopt the rule review?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All, second's been made. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Brings us to item number 9.
So you have in your materials, the draft report on the name and volumes complaint. And I think, the best way to go about presenting this is through a PowerPoint that Robert is gonna start. I will chime in at certain points. But once we get that up and going, I think we'll sort of roll through the facts as well as sort of the considerations that the commission had and observations and recommendations. We did elicit a lot of feedback, both from the TAP plan, from the TAP firearms examiners in Texas, some subject matter experts outside of Texas, certainly various people from NIST had a lot of input in reviewing the report, which was great, because this involves a lot of foundational issues with firearms. And I think we really benefited from having asked for a lot of different input from different sources. So I think Robert has this ready to go now, and we will roll through it, and I may chime in from time to time. So thanks, Robert, for putting that together.
All right. This is a complaint that was filed
We
by
can't
the.
hear you, Robert, I'm
National
sorry. It has to be either super close or you have to. Yeah, that's better.
This is a complaint was filed by the National Innocence Project and the University of Colorado Criminal Defense Clinic on behalf of a person named Nathan Williams. Stems from a 1992 capital murder that occurred in Houston. And at the Nathan Williams trial, analysts erroneously testified that a deformed projectile that was recovered at autopsy was a .25 caliber bullet, which was consistent with the firearm that was carried by Nathan Williams on that day, when in fact the projectile was a .22 caliber bullet, which was consistent with his co-defendant turned accomplice witness. This complaint points to the PCAST report and the National Academy of Science report, ballistic imaging report, and a series of recent court decisions that raise questions about the validity and reliability of firearm tool mark evidence and testimony. The complaint asserts the methodology is a subjective method, has a strong potential for high error rates, and hasn't been properly validated, and request the commission suggest appropriate limits on the conclusions that firearms examiners can give in testimony, and also what other tool mark experts should be able to say. The facts are, he was convicted in 1995. He and his co-defendant, Mr. Rivera, were both armed when they met two other people at a Houston park to engage in a drug deal. The defendant had a .25 caliber automatic handgun and a pistol grip shotgun, and the co-defendant, Mr. Rivera, had a .22 caliber Derringer. The victim, Adonius Collar, he was shot in the head with a shotgun, and when the medical examiner retrieved evidence at autopsy, it also included a deformed bullet projectile, which is labeled as EB1. Based solely on a visual examination of that deformed projectile, a Houston Police Department examiner characterized it as a .25 caliber bullet. And then later, another examiner continued that mischaracterization when he examined EB1 and another bullet that was obtained from a second victim who was wounded, and said they were both .25 caliber bullets. Then the third examiner, he testified at trial that the projectile that was recovered from the deceased victim at autopsy was a .25 caliber bullet, and there's no way in the world it could have been fired from the co-defendant's .22 caliber Derringer, which had never been tested. Post-conviction testing of the co-defendant's Derringer revealed that that projectile had actually been fired from the Derringer, the bottom barrel of the Derringer. So this mischaracterization of the caliber of the projectile was investigated by the Bromwich investigative team. Back in 2007, they issued a report about certain problems at the Houston Police Department Crime Laboratory, and this was one of the cases they reviewed. They had multiple findings. They included finding that it was mischaracterized as bullet recovered autopsy was mischaracterized because it was distorted. The Derringer was not tested because it was not originally submitted as evidence or compared. That original examiner did not conduct a microscopic examination or do any kind of measurements, it was just a visual. And then the laboratory lacked appropriate quality control protocols. Our report goes into the fact that the commission has seen both false positive and false negatives in casework before, and we've issued 2 published reports on those. And then in 2022, we reviewed the laboratory policy of allowing an inconclusive conclusion as correct on proficiency tests, even when the consensus or expected result from the test provider was an elimination or an identification. And we talked about in there the problem with treating all inconclusive conclusions as correct in proficiency testing, because it just undermines the whole reason that you have proficiency monitoring. As you saw here today, we routinely look at proficiency non-conformances, and we've had laboratories contacts about the difficulty of communicating the significance of inconclusive results, and they've requested guidance from us. The report goes into the NAS report, PCAST report, and those reports call for scientific studies to demonstrate the validity and reliability of the method, and particularly that advocate black box studies. And since then, and while this complaint's been pending, several black box studies have been done on bullet comparisons and cartridge case comparisons, and these studies are generally relied upon to establish an error rate for the method. There's a lot of criticism about the design of those studies and the data interpretations from those studies. Concurrent with all that, NIST is 5 years into a foundational review about firearms examination. They've narrowed their focus to 23 published studies, and it's undergoing internal review now and should be released for public comment soon. Our report is taken kind of issue with these error rate studies because traditional error rates of false positives and false negatives are a satisfactory measure of performance when it's just a binary decision. It's either identification or elimination. But the AFTE range of conclusion provides the examiner with 5 options: an identification or an elimination. But there's also this inconclusive that can be broken down into 3 different types. Type A is some support for same source, and type C is some support for a different source, but not enough for an elimination. And in these black box studies and all the criticisms of them, there's relentless disagreement about how you should treat inconclusives when you're calculating error rates. Some people say you should ignore them altogether. Some people say you should count them as correct. Some say you count them as incorrect. And depending on which method you use, the error rates vacillate widely from very low error rates to up to 40% if you include these inconclusive in a certain way. So they're really not a perfect fit for the question of interest in court about the reliability of the data. So a group of statisticians at NIST and a paper that's about to come out by Henry Swafford. You guys will remember him. He was involved in the Friction Ridge, and he was actually the head of the OSAC subcommittee for Friction Ridge for years. Now he works at NIST. He and a group of other prominent statisticians and practitioners have proposed a new approach to reporting this data. And it really applies to all comparison disciplines, not just firearms. And we support this approach, and what it calls upon laboratories and laboratory systems to do is focus on 2 areas: method performance and method conformance. Method conformance refers to the examiner's adherence to a particular method, and method performance relates to whether or not the method can distinguish between same source and different source comparisons. Method conformance is really important in the firearms community because although everybody follows the AFTI guidance, they don't have the same policies and protocols. For example, many laboratories do not allow an analyst to eliminate a weapon based solely on individual or accidental characteristics. They can only eliminate based on class characteristics. So others allow examiners to eliminate a weapon based on individual characteristics. And then there's some policies that you have to have the suspected weapon and so you can examine it and rule out subclass characteristics. So you have these divergent policies and they all have an impact on the error rates that are produced in these studies and also on external proficiency testing results. So method performance, as we're talking about here, is measured by two sets of data. Once all the analysts are using the same method. The first set of data is a discriminability table, which measures how well the method discriminates when ground truth is known. And the second set of data is a reproducibility table, which shows how well analysts reach the same result when they're examining the same evidence. This is a discriminability table from the Houston Forensic Science Center's blind proficiency study. Lynn, did you want to talk about that?
So I just wanted to pause here and thank Bill Worski, who has volunteered to teach and train every prosecutor in the state of Texas about how to communicate these tables accurately and appropriately, so.
And the organization has approved that?
I'm sorry?
And the organization has approved that?
It's
Oh,
not teasing, no, Bill is not gonna teach everybody the tables, but I wanted to pause here to go over this because in order for these tables to work, the end user has to understand what they mean. And the idea, and this is not something that's new really, the notion that you would produce these sort of data. But the idea is that the firearms labs, instead of sort of looking toward the black box data, which is data that they may or may not have participated in, that may or may not reflect their own method or protocol that they use in the lab, we're going to use data preferably from blind testing, but since HFSC is the only lab so far that has done blind PT in firearms, it would be from other validation data that the lab should be collecting on how its method performs. We think, we're very confident that NIST is going to help with sort of setting forth for us or assisting us in figuring out how best to collect these data for labs. But if you look at, we're very lucky in Texas because we have the blind data from HFSC, which has its limitations, but is very helpful. So what you're seeing here is a discriminability table using data from the HFSC blinds on firearms. And what you see is that when you have ground truth, where it's mated or same source, the examiners reported as identification 69% of the time. So almost 70%, they get to ground truth of same source. They call 31% of those in the blind testing inconclusive, and that may be because it doesn't mark well or they just don't feel like there's enough to hit that threshold of identification. And the 0 on the far right top represents that when you have ground truth of same source, in other words, the weapon fired the ammunition, no times do they exclude that weapon as having fired the ammunition, whether it be cartridge casings or bullets. Now moving down to the next line, where you have ground truth non-mated, so different source. In other words, this firearm did not fire those bullets or cartridge casings, and they have ground truth because they've been running these blinds through their system. 0 times did the examiners at HFSC report those as identification. And then, but interestingly in the middle, many times, 74% of the time, they called it inconclusive. And 26% of the time, they got to ground truth of elimination. So what you see there is that, and firearms examiners, when you talk to them, explain this in different ways, but it is quite a bit harder for them to eliminate than it is for them to identify. And the way it was described to Robert and me is that, you know, in firearms, when you're reporting an elimination, you're saying that that weapon could never have fired the cartridge casings or the bullets that you're looking at. And they know that depending on environmental conditions, passage of time, and so on, the characteristics change quite a bit. So what you see here is quite a difference between ground truth same source and ground truth different source when it comes to the amount of inconclusives that are reported. So that's an interesting piece of information that lawyers should know and pay attention to. So if I'm representing a client and I get a lab report that's an inconclusive, I want to know a few things. Number one, is it A, B, or C? And even if the lab doesn't officially report AFD subcategories A, B, or C, is there something in the bench notes that indicates whether the analyst perceived it as A, B, or C subcategories of inconclusive? So I'd want to know that information. I'd also want to know these data because I might want to get another expert to take a look at it and see if they feel like there is sufficient data in what they're viewing to eliminate. When we know that ground truth is elimination quite a bit more of the time than not when the reported result is inconclusive. So I'm hoping that makes sense, everything that I just said, and I'm sure that Bill will brilliantly describe and explain this to all of the lawyers in the state. Robert, you want to take it from here?
Yes. So this is kind of what you just talked about. And that study is similar to other studies, these black box studies. Almost all of them have the same type of result where elimination, when ground truth is elimination, it's characterized as an inconclusive twice the rate when it's characterized as an identification. And that kind of speaks to the fact that we don't know in those studies whether it's because they couldn't make a conclusion based on limitations of the assay or because their laboratory policy is you don't eliminate based on individual characteristics. We just don't know. That's not something that they track in the black box studies. All right, I think we went through this. We also include in this report data from a recent proficiency test that just happened a couple months ago where they submitted recovered crime scene ammunition and then known test-fired ammunition from a different firearm, but it was the same brand. And in that proficiency test, after they were handed in, 32 of the examiners reached the correct, quote-unquote, elimination conclusion. 49 reached an inconclusive conclusion on that different source comparison. In this particular test, alarmingly, 19% of the examiners ID'd the weapon as the weapon that fired the ammunition, when it's in fact comes from a different source. The proficiency test was described by the provider as more challenging than they intended, but that data captures important information for the gatekeeper or fact finder because it shows difficulties with interpreting different firearms of the same brand. Kind of depends on the brand. Notably, no Texas examiners reported that erroneous ID on this proficiency test, and we set forth that data in a discriminability table in the report, noting limitations of the small sample size. I think it was 18 Texas examiners.
Can I just pause you there, Robert? So it was certainly comforting to know that even though that 19% erroneous ID rate nationally was alarming, and I think it is alarming to a lot of people looking at it, it did not carry over to the Texas class that took that PT. Now, I don't know why, and I don't know if, and there were only 18 examiners who took it. CTS was very gracious in providing us those data when we asked. And you know, obviously, you would have to have more data, you'd have to have more test takers, data collected over time to be able to say that that's a consistent thing that we could observe, but it certainly did, it was comforting to see that when we got the data from CTS. And I think it's interesting because observers have claimed for a long time that external PT is too easy. And I thought it was interesting when I read the CTS write-up and they said that this test was more challenging than what they had intended. But then the question becomes, but is it more challenging than casework? Because if it's not, then maybe it is the right calibration of difficulty. So it was certainly an interesting, I know that AFDI's looking at it right now to try to figure out if there's anything that they want to comment about the test. But I do think that we, you know, I don't know what CTS is gonna do in terms of continuing that level of difficulty, ratcheting it back because people are upset about the test or what's gonna happen. But it's an interesting example, I think, of some of the challenges. Now, HFSC examiners had made a really good point when they reviewed the report. I had assumed in looking at the CTS PT results that part of the issue was you had same brand, different firearm. So maybe what one could extrapolate from that is when you have the same brand, different firearm, it poses particular challenges, interpretive challenges. But the feedback they gave was that it's true with some firearms, but not all. In other cases, there are actually other factors in the manufacturing process that make it challenging for examiners. It's not always same brand, different firearm that's the problem. It sort of depends on the brand. So there's a lot that goes into that. But what was interesting is in one of the PT examples, when they gave them different firearm, different brand, there was almost no error in that. So something about this firearm, this brand, one would hope that the firearms community will pay attention to, given the results of this PT. So anyway, maybe that's too much detail, but we go through all of that.
All right, and moving forward to the reproducibility table, this approach recognizes that legal end users need to know both how accurate the method is and how reproducible the method is. And the reproducibility table presented alongside of discriminability table allows the trier of fact to make an informed assessment about reliability of the case in front of them. An example of a reproducibility table from the AIMS-2 study is included here for illustrative purposes.
Okay, so what this is showing, and it took me a while to understand what it shows, but basically, if you look at this table, that green channel that's going on the diagonal, those are all the times in the AIMS-2 reproducibility study that the first examiner who evaluated the evidence got the exact same answer as the second one. So for identification, first evaluation and second evaluation called it identification 601 times. And then you go along from there. So in that middle group, what these data show is that when first evaluation was inconclusive, second evaluation was also inconclusive 841 times. And then down at elimination, when first evaluation, examiner A looks at it, calls it elimination, and then examiner B looks at it and also calls it elimination, so they're in sync, that happened 277 times in the total amount of samples that they sent out. What's in those pink categories are the times when the first examiner called it, for example, inconclusive, and the second examiner called it identification. That's the number of times that happened in each of those categories. So in order to read this table, what you're doing is you're starting in the left column, looking up at the right, and where those meet, it's the number of times that they either agree or disagree with each other. The agreement is in green, the disagreement is in peach or pink, whatever that is. So for example, 13 times, the first examiner called it an identification and the second one called it elimination. 14 times, the first examiner called it elimination and the second examiner called it identification. So this data, what it's trying to show is how consistent our examiners one to the next when given the same thing to analyze. Reproducibility is important for what we're looking at and what we're suggesting in here, because what we want to know is that so let's say I'm the trier fact, or I'm a lawyer and I'm looking at a report. I want to understand that everybody's using the same method in the lab. So whatever results this analyst is giving me in the context of this report, the lab knows that no matter who in the section does the work, they are reaching consistent results. In other words, there's method conformance. Because if you don't know that there's method conformance, you don't know whether that data on discriminability, in other words, do they get the answer right or wrong, applies to the case that you're adjudicating. Because if there's inconsistency among everybody, then how do you evaluate accuracy ever? Because you don't have a method that's standardized. So that's the point that Swafford et al. Are suggesting. And it's a bunch of different people from NIST. They're statisticians, they're practitioners of all types, from DNA to friction-rich to firearms. And the suggestion is that you need both tables to be presented together in order to give the lawyers and the trier of fact an understanding of what's going on. Now, the question of how to gather those data and how the labs are supposed to go about doing that is something that we'll be working on over time, hopefully with the support of NIST. But I think philosophically, the idea is that this is also really good data for lab quality managers to have from a risk management standpoint. If your examiners are showing poor reproducibility, then what do you want to do? You want to take a look at your SOP and see whether there's something about the SOP that's too loose. Whether or not you need to tighten some places, people might be misunderstanding what they're reading. Are we sure that everybody is understanding the same thing? So that's why you want to produce both types of data. And I think from a quality system standpoint, it's really helpful to have that information, to know like, okay, do we have everybody pretty much is doing the same thing and then we have one outlier? Do we need to do some retraining? Maybe they're misunderstanding something. Or are we pretty much all together? We're all doing similar interpretation, or are we all over the place? In which case, maybe we need to tighten our SOP a little bit. So hopefully that makes sense. But that's the idea behind doing this. Or then the question becomes, are there certain types of evidence that we're very consistent on and other types of evidence that we're all over the place on? And what do we need to do about that? What does that mean? So those are the sorts of things that you can get from gathering and releasing those data.
All right, so that AIMS 2 data that you just saw, I guess we already talked about, is it doesn't account for the fact that different laboratories have different methods. And the high number of those inconclusive decisions could be because of the limitations of the test, or it could be because they have a laboratory policy that says you can't eliminate based on that information, accidental characteristics. So the development and use of standard methods within a laboratory and across laboratories is an important step in reducing this variability and discerning what the weaknesses of the reproducibility are. And that's where we say OSAC must insist on clear standards, and I think they're working on it. So we make a lot of recommendations. One is the formation of a statewide task group to provide feedback on this proposed approach and look at the barriers to this method performance reporting suggestions, and also to consider creating a plan that's planned line quality control programs. I know we're working with some labs on blind proficiency testing already. Getting some ideas about model reporting and testimony guidance. We make some observations in the report that we should move away from just saying what the conclusion is, and more towards evidence. Maybe you want to explain this, Lynn?
Yeah, so it's just the difference between these broad-based categories that say something's included, excluded, or inconclusive toward strength of evidence reporting. So the probability of this evidence given two competing hypotheses. So that's what we moved toward in the DNA world, and I think there's certainly a move toward that more generally in forensic science. They've already been doing that in Europe, the UK, and Australia for a very long time. But the idea, though, is if you look at, Dr. Kerrigan and I both serve on the Forensic Science Standards Board, and the FSSB has seen standards come through on interpretation and reporting of conclusions, and different disciplines do it differently. Some of them are conclusion-centric, some of them are evidence-based, some of them are mixing the two, and so there's an effort underway at the FSSB to try to provide some guidance on what is it that we want to see, because the statisticians, by and large, want to see evidence-based reporting, not like the old, conclusion categories. So, but how to transition to that is a different matter, and how to do it in a way that meets each of the disciplines where they are. DNA has star mix that does the math and spits out a likelihood ratio. So then you just have to learn how to communicate the likelihood ratio properly, which is not a small task, and people still struggle on that. So the question is, for the other disciplines where they may use more of a qualitative evidence-based reporting, how do we communicate that and communicate it accurately? And I'm happy for either anyone, Dr. Coble, Dr. Pusini, if you want to add anything to that explanation. But that's how I understand it. And David Kay, if you remember, and that whole Yale Law School clinic wrote us that big report on this subject, and that has been integrated here, describing the trend toward evidence-based reporting.
All right, this task group would also assist with OSAC registry implementation and also assessing a method, handheld toolmark method that's proposed by an author that's cited in the paper. We're asking the labs to provide a clear statement of how each of these reporting categories is defined under the laboratory protocols. Provide a statement that same source opinions does not imply individualization or uniqueness, and provide a statement when the laboratory's protocol incorporates those subcategories of inconclusive, being aware for the lawyers in the room that inconclusiveness is harboring potentially exculpatory information under the Dr. Morgan. Laboratories should provide these tables with method performance data as soon as you can make that available. Analysts shouldn't report black box error rates as a measure of accuracy in their specific case. Of course, don't cite the number of examination as some kind of measure of your accuracy, or assert that two tool marks originated from the same source with absolute or 100% certainty. And notwithstanding AFSCME guidance, there's part of their definition, analysts should not be using the term practical impossibility due to the fact that it's very confusing. Laboratories should develop a policy that includes photography and descriptive note-based documentation of comparison conclusions. And laboratories should proceed in a linear sequential unmasking process of documenting the questioned evidence before viewing the known sample to the extent that's practicable, and take advantage of developments in technology, seek funding for virtual comparison microscopy, and development of rigorous blind quality control programs. And then we've added 2 things to the accreditation checklist for Texas. Laboratories shall develop a policy on blind verification of comparative conclusions, all types. And laboratories should develop a policy on the documentation of consultations occurring during casework. And we use ANAB's proposed definition of consultation as a starting point for that discussion. So the particulars of those 2 items, including benchmarks and timing, will be developed by that task group. So participation is important.
Thank you, Robert. So far, we've received a lot of positive feedback. I think there are a number of firearms examiners who are excited to get going and have a lot of questions about how they're meant to go about doing this. But it's certainly, one of them said something along the lines of, this is going to be challenging for us, but all meaningful change is hard. So I appreciated that feedback from the community, and I think it'll take some time for certain, but it feels like a good way for the discipline to move forward, and if we pilot this and it works well, then other disciplines may also start reporting in a way that provides this type of data. Because really it applies to all comparative disciplines. I think outside of like talks and drugs, it probably applies to everybody today. Right? I think our it's back. So in any event, a lot of people worked really hard on this report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Lynn, I have a question for you.
I have a question for you as far as the assessments are concerned. There's language in the report that speaks to beginning assessments scheduled as January 1st, 2025. But then there's language within requirement 7 that speaks to a timeline being provided at the October 2024 quarterly meeting. So I was just curious if that is a hard fast date on January 1 to.
No, that should have been deleted.
Okay.
If it wasn't, I thought I deleted it everywhere it appeared, and if not, we will delete that. So we should adopt the report with that edit.
Okay, just making sure.
Yeah, no, it's too fast of a timeline. I think people just need to meet, we gotta get NIST in to start talking about what it is that, how one gathers the data. And then I think we'll probably have this as a standing agenda item for a while. ANAB is very aware of this. We talked to them about it, we gave them the report, and they said, they're sort of on standby for us to let them know what the timing would look like, but they'll incorporate it whenever we're ready, and I'm sure that's true of A2LA as well.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify.
Thank you. Thank you for pointing that out.
Anything further?
Jarvis has his hand up.
Sorry.
Can y'all hear me?
Jarvis?
You hear me?
No, I could barely hear you.
Let me see.
I can't. Hold on one second, Jarvis. We need to, your audio's not really coming through. Can you speak one more time?
Okay, can everybody hear me? Hello, hello, hello?
No, it's way too
Okay.
loud. Hold on a second.
So, the only question was, wait.
Steve's working on the audio, Jarvis.
Okay.
We can
Well,
hear
Jarvis
you
talks,
in
you
the
can't hear
Zoom,
him.
Jarvis. It sounds like they can't hear you in the room, but we can hear you
You can't
perfectly
hear the
on
audio
Zoom.
from there. Yeah.
There.
Try again?
Can you try again, Jarvis?
Hello, 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 hello. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better.
This voice
Okay.
off, so I'm gonna crank it.
Just talk loud if you would, please.
Okay, will do. And I hate to do all this work for just one small question, but if I heard you talking before, the recommendation was that the examiner should not say that this comes from the same source with 100% accuracy. Are they saying that you should not say it comes from the same source, or just adding in the prepositional phrase with 100% accuracy?
It's the absolute certainty, the 100% accuracy, the practical impossibility, all that kind of language. We are not saying that they can no longer use the APTI framework. What we're saying is that if they're using that framework, they can't use all of that language around certainty. They can't apply uniqueness or individualization when they are reporting. And we're also saying that they need to start reporting method conformance and method performance data so the trier of fact understands some of the both the strengths and limitations of the test itself, especially in the area of inconclusives.
So in the testimony that they're giving to the trier of fact, they should be doing the conformance and performance analysis.
Once they have it available, that's gonna take some time. And we're also gonna need to train the lawyers on these tables, what they mean, how they should present it. I was teasing a little bit before, just because Dolworski happens to be here, but the prosecutors, TDCAA, I'm sure will want to have some training on what these tables mean, how to read them, and the same is true for the defense bar. So we think it's a really important and helpful step forward for everyone to have this level of transparency and information. And there's gonna have to be some education and training for sure. But for now, I think most of your analysts should not be getting up there, even now, applying uniqueness and saying things like absolute certainty or reasonable degree of scientific certainty or any of that stuff. They should all know that already.
I think that adding the performance, conformance, and this is for you, but also for Worski as well, if he's in the room, to be adding that into the framework in the predicate manual. So whenever that data becomes available, so that prosecutors know, especially new prosecutors know, to be asking that question as a matter of course, to just add that in, at least in a footnote or something like that in the predicate manual for prosecutors.
Yeah, I think we could, I'm not sure how often the predicate manual gets revised, but I'm certain that that would be a good place to help outline these things. We could also do articles in the newsletters for both the defense and prosecution and in their other regular stuff that people look at as a source of information. I'm sure TCDLA will want to hear about this as well. So I don't know how often the predicate manuals get revised, but I think we could talk to them about, working on this. If there's a firearms section in there, which I imagine there is, yes. Thanks, Charles.
Anything else? Very good. So is there a motion to adopt the draft investigative report subject to revisions as we stated earlier, the edit? And any other revisions by the staff?
Yes, Dr. Murrow, so moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, second's been made. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Also, we need to have a motion to instruct the staff to establish a firearms and tool mark working group for purposes of implementing the recommendations in the report. Have a motion?
So moved.
Second? All right, second's been made. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you for that. This will be a standing item on the agenda, I think, for some time. The next item that I wanted to update you on is agenda item number 10, which is the complaint regarding the activity level testimony in the Armstrong case. I'm pretty close to circulating a draft on that. It is as extensive conceptually as, almost as extensive, less tables than the firearms report. It's quite, there's a lot of work out there on this, and there are a lot of people who I think we would value from hearing their feedback on the report draft. So it's going to be ready for July. It is not ready for today. And I also want to make sure that before the commission has it up for adoption, that both Dr. Califoot, the complainant Tiffany Roy have a chance to look at it, the chair of the Human Biology Subcommittee of OSAC, the people who've written all the books, and all of that. That everyone has an opportunity to comment to make sure that it is correct and adds value. So it'll be on the July meeting for sure.
All right. Item number 11.
So Dr. Coble and Ms. Zemek and I will have a report on DNA training next time. Other than that, the center at Sam Houston that Dr. Kerrigan runs will be very soon posting access to the entire DNA training that we did at the Capitol. So that'll be available for people that already has CLE credit attached to it, so people will be able to watch it on that platform. And those are the main updates. I don't think that I have a ton of other things. We have various conferences that we are going to, but in terms of commission organized training, the next thing will be to continue with the DNA training that is on the horizon. There are quite a few items that we need to move.
All right. Item number 12, is there an update from the Texas Association of Crime Lab Directors?
Dr. Stowe couldn't make it today, but I think Shelley has an update.
The update is we filed taxes.
So they're
We all.
they'll have more of an update in July because they'll meet after the licensing advisory.
Next is any proposed agenda items that anything the commissioners want to direct staff to place on. All right. 14 is the schedule and location of the future panel quarterly meetings between the July 26th, October 25th, and January 31st, 2025 quarterly meetings. Is there a motion to direct the staff to schedule these meetings?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion carries. Is there any public comment? Seeing none, is there a motion to adjourn?
Yes, sir, so moved.
Second? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And I have to- All right.